The recent events in Russia have sent shockwaves throughout the entire globe. The Kremlin is currently being attacked by the largest shark in recorded history. This new classification information completely alters everything. Nothing will ever return to its previous state as a crew for App Daily. We looked into everything there is to know about the extraordinary event that took place in Russia. You can help our staff by donating to ensure that this information is maintained. If you are ready, let's get started. The conflict that has been raging between Russia and Ukraine has now reached the boundary zone. In Russia's two communities, residents came to blows with one another for the first time. As a result of this remarkable occurrence, the Kremlin was rendered absolutely inoperable. Russia was preparing to call her Ukraine at the time of the attack, which took place within Russia's own country and was carried out by Russian soldiers. The question is, how did such a convoluted occurrence take? Let's brush up on our knowledge so that we can respond intelligently to all of the inquiries. The organizational framework of the Ukrainian armed forces is extremely intricate. It has thousands of Russian fighters among its ranks. The citizens of Russia do not support the war that is currently going on between Russia and Ukraine. Because of this, a significant number of Russian fighters have decided to voluntarily join the Ukrainian force. Additionally, Russian nationals already residing in Ukraine made the decision to join the resistance against Putin's troops. Following the conclusion of this conflict, these two organizations came together to create the Free Russian Legion, which is currently made up of hundreds of soldiers. This organization's primary objective is to put an end to Russia's aggressive policies and transform the country into a Tran. They believe that as a result, the Putin system must come to an end. It is anticipated that if Russia is victorious in this conflict, the Putin government will collapse and there will be a significant uprising in Russia after this revolution. There are millions of people in Russia who have the hope that their country will become a progressive nation. Some of these individuals are participating in hostilities directed against. In recent days, there has been talk of the Free Russia Regiment gaining ground in terms of membership. The capitulation of Russian soldiers is the explanation for this development. Thousands of Russian residents are coerced into serving in the military by the Russian government. When these civilians are transported to the battleground, the Ukrainian army is met with their unconditional submission because of their intense hatred for. Some of the Russian soldiers who surrendered made the decision to fight against their former country every day. There are more and more of these warriors on the battlefield. Many details regarding Putin's military plans have been leaked by Russian service members currently fighting in the Ukrainian army. This presents a significant threat to Moscow in the presence of this threat. Putin is helpless and powerless too. The operation that took place today demonstrates how helpless Putin is in this circumstance. An operation was intended to be carried out jointly by the Ukrainian army and the Free Russian Legion. As a direct consequence of this operation, communication was established with Russian service members stationed in the Donetsk region. These warriors couldn't wait to engage in combat with the Russian. The soldiers were split up into two parties, each consisting of 50 individuals. These groups took control of Russian military equipment and crossed the border into Russian territory. Soldiers appeared in two villages on Russia's border with Ukraine and announced to the residents that they had successfully taken control of the villages. The soldiers said in their statement that the Putin government does not control these two villages anymore and that they are in. They promised to secure the safety of civilians and stated that Putin would soon be removed from his position as leader of the Russian people. The Russian army was powerless to stop this action taken by the warriors because of the circumstances. The Ukrainian army, working in conjunction with Russian soldiers opposed to Putin, was successful in seizing control of two cities in. Putin's control of the regions on Russia's borders has been broken for the very first time since the beginning of the conflict. Russia is in a hopeless predicament right now. The question is, how did this procedure take place? According to accounts that were published in Russian media outlets, Ukrainian drones were on patrol in the Bucolic region prior to the operate. The director's drawings utilized by the Ukrainian forces were successful in destroying the camera systems located on the borders of Russia. As a direct result of this operation, Russia experienced a significant reduction in the level of protection along its borders. The Ukrainian armed forces had meticulously prepared every aspect of this operation. Drones were used to monitor the movement of Russian soldiers. Throughout the course of this operation, Ukrainian troops kept a continuous watch on the Russian soldiers and stood ready to initiate the attack. The use of force was required. Drones are used for protection. The Russian rebel soldiers were successful in entering Bryansk territory without being detected. They put up resistance. Soldiers from Russia were the first to approach the town of Su. They detained soldiers working under Putin who were stationed in this town. There were still some of the soldiers in town after they had taken possession of the town. Roughly 50 personnel evacuated the base in various military vehicles. 50 soldiers arrived in the village of Luhana after a journey that lasted for 20 minutes. Inside the detention center were 30 service members from Putin's troops. They all voluntarily gave up there. It was possible to record their noises. According to reports, the insurgent group is making preparations to take control of additional territory. On the other hand, it is unknown which parts of Russia this organization intends to advance into at this time. There is yet another factor that gives the Kremlin reason for concern. It is unclear how many rebel soldiers are currently serving in the Russian armed forces. The Kremlin is concerned that additional Russian military personnel will launch offensive operations against them. The Russian intelligence service has begun a comprehensive investigation into this matter. They are looking for Russian soldiers who are communicating with Ukrainian soldiers and attempting to identify them. On the other hand, the Ukrainian force is adamant that all precautions have been taken to ensure the safety of any Russian service members who are interested in working with the Ukrainian forces is guaranteed. The Russian leadership was forced to make a choice due to the gravity of the situation. As a direct consequence of this decision, all of the service members stationed in Ukraine were consolidated into a handful of military facilities. It is strictly forbidden for soldiers to travel to other areas or access ammunition storage area. It is anticipated that Russian military personnel will launch an assault on the ammunition storage areas. This dread demonstrates Putin's utter desperation. These operations being carried out by Russian troops are also having an effect on the local inhabitants. Since the beginning of the conflict, Putin has never stopped spreading misinformation among the Russian people. This propaganda asserts that the conflict being fought is necessary for some reason. By making frequent declarations, the Russian people and our stall Russian soldiers are discrediting this propaganda. The Russian people are now aware that Putin's political ambitions were the sole motivation for starting this conflict. The Russian people are reacting even more strongly as a result of this visitor. Putin has not only lost the support of the people, but has also experienced a significant defeat on the battlefield. According to recent polls conducted in Russia, support for Putin is on the decline and getting worse by the day. The population of Russia currently desires a significant political shift. Vladimir Putin, who is 70 years old and currently serves as president of Russia, has been in power for almost 25. The Russian people have had enough of Putin's policies, which are currently in place. Russia has never shied away from aggressive policies and has been unable to democratize its own population. Up until this point, do you aspire to reside in a nation that is democratic and at peace? The most significant indicator of this is the rebellion that was initiated by Russian soldier. South believes that this operation by Russian soldiers against Putin is just the beginning of things to come. If Vladimir Putin does not resign in the face of these operations, there is a possibility that civil war will break out in Russia, and it is predicted that these operations will increase even further as a result of failing to win the conflict against Ukraine. Putin is now confronted with the possibility of a civil. Every day Putin displays more and more despicable behavior. What are your thoughts on the Mojo catastrophe that has been unfolding in Russia? Your thoughts on the Free Russian Regiment would be appreciated. What do you believe the Russian military can do to stop Putin from becoming president? What are your thoughts on the fact that the conflict has spread to the boundaries of Russia? Your thoughts and comments are important too. Keep up with us here for further information. The ATTP Daily News YouTube channel owns these movies and all of their associated intellectual property. There is no need to depend on any other social media. Publications are Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Usernames are all listed on the app Daily News website. Combat in an illegal manner any websites or channels that use it without first obtaining our author. A startling turn of events and the outbreak of hostilities between Russia and Ukraine. A significant operation against the Belarusian and Russian armies that were preparing to invade Ukrainian territory was coordinated by Poland, which is an ally of Ukraine. After that, we'll focus on the sentences. We can see that there have been no wars fought between any two countries throughout the entirety of human. A great number of states are actively searching for coalition partners in the hope of tilting the conflict in their favor. This conflict has persisted in exactly the same manner throughout history. Examples of this can be seen in the conflict that is currently going on between Russia and Ukraine. Both nations are searching for other nations to join their cause in an effort to reduce the number of lives lost in the. Russia attempted to facilitate its occupation of Ukrainian territory by bringing other states along with it, such as Iran, Syria, and Belarus. The invasion of Ukrainian territory by Russia occurred on February 24th of the previous year. On the other hand, the number of countries supporting Ukraine in this conflict is significantly greater than those supporting. Because of this, the Ukrainian army was able to gain strength in a short amount of time, while the Russian army, which is significantly bigger than the Ukrainian army and is equipped with modern military technology, experienced significant casualties on Ukrainian territory as a result. This demonstrates, once again, how crucial it is to have allies while fighting. The Polish government has been of significant assistance to Ukraine ever since the conflict broke out, making Poland an extremely valuable partner for the Ukrainian armed forces. Shortly after Russian troops entered Ukrainian territory, Poland opened its borders to people from Ukraine and assisted a large number of Ukrainians in escaping the conflict. Not only, but it also made the promise to send its own tanks to the Ukrainian army and mobilize to drive the Russian forces that were occupying Ukraine out of the country. Poland is attempting to take measures against Belarus, which has been on Russia's side since the beginning of the war. These measures are being taken in addition to Poland's assistance to the Ukrainian army after the Russian army crossed into Ukrainian territory through the Belarusian border. Poland, which is a member of both NATO and the European Union, shut down the border with Belarus and began deploying soldiers there. The Polish government, fully aware of the danger posed to their country by both Russian and Belarusian troops, has dispatched a large number of tanks, armored vehicles, and soldiers to the border with Belarus in order to counteract this threat, whereas at the same time, they are erecting checkpoints and barriers along the boundary. With the help of sensors that have been installed in these massive towers, the Polish army is able to track every movement of the Belarusian army. The Polish army recently became aware of movement on the part of the Belarusian army, despite the fact that there had been no threat for several months. Soldiers from Belarus and Russia were making preparations to band together to create a large army and launched a fresh assault on Ukrainian territory. As soon as the Polish authorities discovered that the Russian army was attempting to attack, the Russian army made preparations to launch an assault on the Ukrainian city of Lviv by forming a joint unit with Belarusian soldiers. The Russian army's goal was to capture the city. They communicated with the relevant authorities in Ukraine and issued a warning to the Ukrainian forces. In response to this warning, the Ukrainian forces were supposed to move their soldiers and civilians closer to the border with Belarus in order to stop an offensive that would go through Belarus. The government of Poland came to the conclusion that the only way to stop an invasion by the Russian army from Belarus was to coordinate a massive military operation. The Polish Ministry of Defense came to the conclusion that it was necessary to move the Polish troops closer to the border with Belarus. 10,000 Polish troops have invaded Ukrainian territory and are currently moving towards the city of Kovel, which is located in Ukraine. The purpose of the Polish army's incursion into Ukrainian territory with a significant number of tanks and military vehicles was to provide assistance to the Ukrainian army in its fight against the armies of Russia and Belarus. Following its mobilization in the city of Lviv, the Ukrainian army proceeded toward the city of Kovel, which was also the location of the Polish army at the time when Ukrainian soldiers sold Polish soldiers in front of other Ukrainian soldiers. The Polish soldiers could not conceal their surprise. Poland, which has been supporting Ukraine in both a military and budgetary capacity ever since the conflict broke out, has now deployed its armed forces inside Ukrainian territory for the first time. To be more specific, this is the very first time that a country that is allied with Ukraine has elected to send its army to fight alongside Ukraine against. The Ukrainian and Polish armed forces joined forces and immediately began moving closer to the border with Belarus. Even though Belarusian forces had already crossed into Ukrainian territory, they were taken aback when they encountered an army numbering 20,000 strong. The Ukrainian and Polish armies started engaging the Russian and Belarusian troops by sending their tanks ahead of them and opening fire with their R. On Ukrainian territory, Ukrainian soldiers have begun launching airstrikes with unmanned fighter jets against enemy troops using military aircraft. In the face of an army of 20,000, the hostile forces of 5,000 were rendered absolutely helpless when they saw a large army returning from Belarus to fight against them. The hostile forces that had planned to occupy the city of Kiev were forced to escape from Ukrainian territory and enter Belarus. After the victory over the opposing forces, which were Ukrainian and Polish, the Russian and Belarusian soldiers made the decision to call off the Lviv operation in order to ensure the safety of the city. Soldiers positioned mortars and barricades along the border with Belarus. A standing ovation was given by the officials of the Ukrainian parliamentary body in response to the victorious repulse of the Ukrainian. Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, called Mateo Moki, the Prime Minister of Poland, to express his gratitude for Poland's assistance. Officials in Poland are under the impression that Russia has designed not only on occupying Ukrainian territory, but also all of Europe. As a result of the fact that Putin is seeking to reclaim the authority that he once held in the Soviet Union, many of our analysts are of the opinion that this invasion will not be restricted to the right. Because of this, the Polish army has not stopped putting forth its best effort to bring an end to the Russian occupation of Ukrainian territory as quickly as is humanly feasible. Poland was one of the first countries to give its approval for Ukraine's membership in. Poland was one of the first countries to realize that if Ukraine joined NATO, the NATO army would enter Ukrainian territory and battle against the Russian forces that were occupying it. One of the countries that supports Ukraine's membership bid in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is Poland. Not only does Poland provide financial assistance to the Ukraine, but it also applies economic sanctions against. The Polish authorities do not place any barriers or create any difficulties for Ukrainian citizens at the border and welcome all of them inside Polish borders. However, they do not do the same for Russian citizens. Poland has announced that it will not allow residents of Russia to enter the country, citing its efforts to reduce the influence that Russia has on its economic and diplomatic. The Ukraine is supported by a large number of countries that are its allies. In the early stages of the conflict, the Ukrainian army was forced to fight the war on its own. But by the middle of the conflict, it received assistance from virtually all of Europe's nations. The United States of America, the United Kingdom, France, Turkey, Poland, and Germany are among the countries that provide the most assistance to. Since the beginning of the conflict, the administration in the United States has provided the Ukrainian army with a significant quantity of weaponry, ammunition, armored vehicles, and other pieces of military equipment, such as tanks. After the United States agreed to send Abrams tanks to Ukraine in recent weeks, Germany also took action and decided to send Leopard 2 tanks to the Ukrainian. This came after the U.S. agreed to send the tanks to Ukraine. Germany made the decision to ship 14 Leopard 2 tanks to the Ukrainian army, in contrast to the United States' decision to send 31 Abrams tanks. Unmanned aerial vehicles, also known as drones, were the key piece of military technology that shifted the focus of the Russian military had been conducting air attacks inside Ukrainian territory by obtaining unmanned fighter aircraft from its longtime ally Iran. These strikes were carried out inside Ukrainian airspace. The intervention of Turkish President Erdogan in this conflict resulted in the beginning of the delivery of unmanned Bayraktar TB2 fighter aircraft to the Ukrainian. Turkey, which has already provided Ukraine with a significant quantity of unmanned fighter jets, has also announced that it will construct a production facility for unmanned fighter jets based in Ukraine under the name Bayraktar. On the other hand, the government of Russia has made it clear that they intend to demolish such a facility in the event that it is built in Ukraine. Would Vladimir Putin, who has a positive relationship with Rejet, have the audacity to target a Turkish-built manufacturing facility and destroy it in the not-too-distant future? We are going to obtain the response to this inquiry. Ambushes have been set up by the Ukrainian army against Russian forces in Crimea. Ukrainian troops have been successful in annihilating the Russian army that was sent by. The war that has been going on between Russia and Ukraine for the past year has finally begun to wind down as Russian forces that are occupying Ukrainian territory have started to gradually lose their grip on the territory while the Russian military keeps up its assaults on the Bakhmut front. Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, has started sending soldiers that he personally enlisted into the army to the territory of. This decision to partially mobilize the army was made after Putin made the decision to send soldiers to Ukraine as a direct response to the presence of Russian troops in Kherson. The Ukrainian armed forces have initiated a significant military offensive there recently. The Ukrainian army was successful in wresting control of the Sharika region away from the occupying Russian forces. As a result of this victory, the Ukrainian army has started stationing a significant number of its soldiers in the Sharika region. The Ukrainian army has managed to advance as far as the Sheriff and its commander Vilo. Dire Zelensky has moved to conquer the Kherson region with a force of 10,000 people. This is the next OB objective of the Ukrainian army, which has already captured the. Our representative was going to serve as Kherson's focal point. The Ukrainian army, which was successful in driving back the Russian forces that had been stationed in Sheka, was able to seize control of the city in a brief amount of time and do so by capturing it. Zelensky came to the conclusion that it would be best to dispatch the Ukrainian troops that were stationed in the city of Karyo. Along with taking control of the town of Sharika, the Ukrainian forces have the OB objective of thoroughly wresting control of the Kherson region away from the Russian forces. To this end, they plan to conduct a large-scale operation supported by a sizable army. However, when Russian Chief of General Staff Valery Zimov learned that the city of Sheka had been taken by Ukrainian forces, he made the decision to dispatch Russian soldiers to the Kherson. These soldiers were already waiting on the Russian border. The previous attempt by Just Amos to land soldiers by sea had been thwarted by Ukrainian forces. Muva wished to send troops to Kherson Bay Road despite the fact that her previous shipment of troops had been unsuccessful. This time, Moscow dispatched 2,000 of their most capable soldiers. From Russia to the Crimean Peninsula, Russian forces have started to advance towards the city of Kherson with a massive military convoy. These Russian forces have just departed from the Crimean Peninsula. Action was taken taken by Ukrainian troops stationed in the settlement of Sheikha after the Ukrainian intelligence service received word that Russian forces had begun a new military. Ukrainian commanders devised a comprehensive strategy to intercept a Russian convoy that was departing from Crimea. This Russian convoy was the target of the Ukrainian commander's plan. After vacating the city, the Ukrainian troops departed Sharika, and I started walking in the direction of the metropolis of Lviv in order to lay a large ambush for Russian troops coming from Crimea. Ukrainian troops stationed in this town on the banks of the Dnieper River would cross the river and enter the town from the opposite side. Following their successful attempt to cross the river, the Ukrainian troops made their way to the city of Samka, which is located on the roadway that connects Crimea and Kherson, with the knowledge that the city was safe for the Ukrainian. The 1st Santa Reconnaissance Squad of the Ukrainian forces consisted of 12 individuals. Their mission was to determine whether or not there was any threat in the surrounding area. Ukrainian troops will eventually establish a presence in this region after the army completes its advance into the semi-nuclear region. Buildings that had been abandoned in the city were used to create a 3-kilometer-long barrier around the roadway. The Ukrainian soldiers who had planted mines on the highway where the Russian army will pass started to take cover in the wooded areas surrounding the highway as the Russian army approached. And then that time arrived. The Russian forces that had embarked from Crimea reached the city of Seneca. These were the same forces that were attempting to progress towards the core of Kherson. The 30-vehicle convoy continued on their journey, oblivious to everything that was going on around them. The Russian armored vehicle of the Hedgehog model that was heading the Russian convoy was destroyed when it stepped on a mine that had been planted by the Ukrainian army. Due to the intensity of the detonation, the Russian forces were incapable of comprehending what had taken place, so they incorrectly assumed that the Ukrainian army had carried out an errors. The Russian soldiers began to exit the armored vehicles and move toward their comrades, who were still inside the armored vehicle, to offer assistance. At this precise instant, Ukrainian soldiers emerged from the buildings in which they had been hiding and engaged Russian forces in a firefight, which resulted in the Russian forces being caught in the cross. The Russian convoy had no way to get away. As Ukrainian soldiers hiding in the woods by the side of the roadway started opening fire on them, there was no place for the Russian convoy to go. The Ukrainian forces launched a two-pronged assault on the Russian troops while they were completely encircled in their position. When the Russian soldiers attempted to find the hiding locations of the Ukrainian soldiers but were unsuccessful, they were at a loss for what to do next. The Russian soldiers who had exited their armored vehicles and entered the surrounding area swiftly re-entered their vehicles and began to drive away from the location. The Russian forces were forced to abandon one that soldiers dashed with the escape of the Russian forces. The Russian forces had no other option. The Russian soldiers were taken prisoner by the Ukrainian soldiers who had surrounded the roadway and were heading back to the city of She. Since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, Russia has been facing challenges in terms of gathering intelligence, which is a truth that is widely known. The absence of Russian intelligence contributed to the success of this attack by the Ukrainian army, which was carried out successfully. It was stated that over 200 Russians were involved during the attack carried out by the Ukrainian army. Several soldiers were killed and some Russian soldiers on the opposing side were taken prisoner. Even though the Ukrainian army has not yet taken control of Kherson itself, they are making significant headway in reducing the authority held by the Russian army within the territory of Ukraine. The Kherson region was one of the first areas that was occupied by the Russian troops that were occupying the country. Therefore, Russia places a significant amount of significance on the Kherson region because it utilizes this region as the center for coordination of the Russian army's operations on the territory of Ukraine. Nevertheless, the position of the Kherson region is of much greater significance which is not too far from the truth. For the purpose of maintaining the safety of the Crimean Peninsula, it is of utmost significance. The Crimean Peninsula is going to be in jeopardy if the Ukrainian army manages to thoroughly seize control of the Kherson region. After Russia's occupation of Crimea in 2014, Vladimir Putin has had complete authority over the region ever. The Ukrainian leader wanted Marsy to declare in almost every one of his speeches that the Crimean Peninsula would be retaken from the Russian forces that are currently occupying. It will have their presence removed from both Ukraine and Crimea. Putin has recently started amassing soldiers on the Crimean Peninsula out of the fear that he will lose control of. After Ukrainian troops destroyed the Ke Bridge in recent months, Russian President Vladimir Putin dispatched a large number of air defense systems to the Crimea Peninsula. Putin has stationed the pair S-1 air defense weapons all by themselves around the Ke Bridge. Targeting the military installations used by Russian forces that are situated in Crimea is a priority for the Ukrainian. You are aware that rather than launching an air attack on the Kerch Bridge, Russian warplanes are currently moving from the military airport in Crimea and conducting airstrikes on many areas located within Ukrainian territory. Zelensky, who is interested in preventing this from happening, has been successful in destroying a significant number of Russian military aircraft and helicopters by carrying out an air operation on these military airports located in Crimea. Over the past few months, as can be seen from the satellite images that have been obtained, it is clear that a total of 3 combat helicopters and 5 fighter aircraft that were stationed at the airfield have been. Additionally, the airstrip at the airport was altered in an abnormal manner, making it impossible for Russian forces to remove their aircraft. From here, at the beginning of the conflict, Ukrainian forces focused on defending only their own territory towards the middle of the conflict. However, they started to expand their operations and began to organize operations within the borders of. Zelensky, who is allied with the United States, has asked for long-range missile systems from the United States because he is fed up with the Russian military's assaults on residential areas and energy infrastructure located on Ukrainian territory.